Commander Marcus Johnson exhaled slowly as he turned onto Oak Ridge Lane. The streetlights cast long shadows across the pavement, illuminating his pristine colonial home at the end of the cul-de-sac. After 6 months deployed with Naval Special Warfare Group 2, the familiar sight of home sent waves of relief through his tired body. Almost there, he whispered to himself, drumming his fingers against the steering wheel of his black Suburban. The neighborhood was quiet at 9:30 p.m. Most windows were dark, with only the occasional blue flicker of television screens breaking the stillness. Marcus had called ahead to his sister Tanya, who had left a porch light on and stocked his refrigerator with essentials. As he pulled into his driveway, Marcus noticed an unfamiliar sedan parked across the street. Not unusual, probably a neighbor's visitor, but 15 years of special operations had trained him to notice details. He grabbed his duffel bag from the passenger seat and stepped out into the cool evening air. The weight of his Navy Cross and Bronze Star medals rested in his luggage, awards he rarely displayed but carried with quiet pride. "Home sweet home," Marcus said, fishing his keys from his pocket and walking toward his front door, completely unaware that his life was about to change forever. Marcus had barely closed the front door when he heard it. A distant squeal of tires, then the crunch of heavy boots on gravel. He set his duffel bag down, instinctively moving toward the window. 3 unmarked SUVs screeched to a halt in front of his house. Men in tactical gear poured out, weapons drawn. No sirens. No warning. "What the?" Marcus started, but his words were cut short by a thunderous crash as his door splintered inward. "Police! Get down! Get down now!" The shouts came from multiple directions at once as flashlight beams crisscrossed his living room. "I'm Commander Marcus Johnson, U.S. Navy," he began, raising his hands high. On the ground, face down, screamed a masked officer, his assault rifle trained on Marcus's chest. Marcus slowly began to kneel, years of discipline taking over. "There must be some mistake. This is my home. I just returned from deployment." A boot slammed between his shoulder blades, driving him to the floor. The cold barrel of a gun pressed against his neck. "Subject secured," barked the officer, pinning him down. 5 more officers stormed through the house, appending furniture, yanking drawers out, and smashing picture frames. "Check for weapons," shouted another voice, this one belonging to a tall man in a windbreaker with "police" emblazoned across the back. "Officer Ramirez, what address is this?" the man demanded. 4872 Oak Ridge Lane, Captain Hayes, replied a younger officer, looking down at his phone. "And the warrant?" 4827, sir. Hayes paused, his eyes narrowing. "What did you say?" "The warrant is for 4827 Oak Ridge." "This is 4872, a moment of silence fell over the room. But instead of calling off the raid, Captain Hayes looked down at Marcus and said coldly, "Well, we're already here. Keep searching." Marcus felt the knee pressing harder into his back as he struggled to breathe. The polished hardwood floor, once a point of pride in his home, now pressed cold against his cheek. Family photos lay shattered nearby, his uniformed image staring back at him from behind cracked glass. "Sir, you have the wrong address," Marcus said firmly but calmly. "I am Commander Marcus Johnson of the United States Navy SEALs. My military ID is in my wallet." Captain Hayes snorted. "Yeah, right. And I'm the Secretary of Defense." Several officers laughed. "Check my ID," Marcus insisted. "My service record is public. One phone call to the Pentagon will confirm." "Shut up." Officer Daniels, the one kneeling on Marcus's back, pressed harder. "Captain, I think our suspect is resisting." "I am not resisting," Marcus stated clearly, careful to keep his voice level despite the growing pain. "I am simply asking you to verify my identity." Hayes circled around, staring down with cold eyes. "You know what your problem is? You think you're special. You think your fancy stories about being in the military mean you can talk back to officers of the law. Daniels yanked Marcus's arms backward with unnecessary force, slapping handcuffs around his wrists so tightly that they immediately cut into his skin. Too tight, Marcus winced. The cuffs are too tight. Oh, I'm sorry, is the commander uncomfortable? Mocked Daniels, twisting the cuffs even tighter. Maybe you'd prefer a 5-star hotel? From his position on the floor, Marcus caught sight of something disturbing. Officer Ramirez, the younger cop who had noticed the address discrepancy, had picked up his wallet from the side table and was staring at his military ID. The officer's face had gone pale. Captain Hayes, sir. We have a problem. He's telling the truth. This is Commander Marcus Johnson. 3 tours in Afghanistan, 2 in Iraq. Navy Cross recipient. Hayes snatched the ID card, studied it for a long moment, then shoved it into his pocket. Probable cause, Hayes declared loudly. We received reports of a break-in at this address. Subject matches the description. What description? Asked Ramirez, confusion evident in his voice. Hayes glared at him. The description I just received. Male. Black. Athletic build. But sir, there was no such report. Are you questioning me, Officer Ramirez? Hayes's voice dropped dangerously low. Ramirez fell silent, his eyes darting apologetically toward Marcus. Get him up, Hayes ordered. Commander or not, he's coming downtown for interfering with police business. They dragged Marcus to his feet, his shoulders screaming in pain from the awkward position. As they pushed him toward the door, Marcus locked eyes with Officer Ramirez. Your body camera, Marcus said quietly. Make sure it stays on. The holding cell reeked of bleach and despair. Marcus sat on the metal bench, his wrists raw and bleeding where the too tight handcuffs had cut into his skin. 3 hours had passed since they'd brought him in, and no one had offered him medical attention, water, or his phone call. Hey! Commander Johnson needs medical attention, called out Terry Wilson, a young man in the adjacent cell. His wrists are bleeding, man. The desk sergeant glanced up, then returned to his newspaper without a word. It's okay, Marcus said quietly. Save your energy. It ain't right, Terry replied, shaking his head. I saw how they booked you. Didn't even read you your rights. Marcus nodded. Every protocol violation, every skipped procedure, was another piece of evidence. His SEAL training had taught him to remain observant even under duress. Officer Jenkins approached, twirling a baton. Well, well. The famous commander wants special treatment? I want what any citizen is entitled to, medical attention, water, and my phone call, Marcus replied evenly. Jenkins laughed, leaning close to the bars. Here's what I think of your entitlements. He deliberately knocked over the cup of water another officer had reluctantly left within Marcus's reach. You know what's funny? Jenkins continued. Captain Hayes ran your plates. Nice car for someone from your neighborhood. Where'd you steal it from? Marcus stared back, his face a mask of control. That Suburban is paid for with combat pay earned in service to this country. Jenkins sneered. Sure, and I'm the president. You'll be spending the weekend with us, Commander. Captain Hayes made sure no one's processing your paperwork until Monday morning. As Jenkins walked away laughing, Marcus closed his eyes and centered himself. What these officers didn't understand was that he had endured far worse than this. What they saw as breaking him was actually giving him the time and evidence he needed. Each violation, each moment of mistreatment, was another link in the chain he would use to pull down this corrupt system. Dawn broke over Oak Ridge Lane, illuminating a scene of unexpected solidarity. Deshaun Parker, a retired history teacher who lived 3 doors down, stood in his bathrobe directing neighbors like a conductor. Mrs. Chen, you have the clearest footage from your doorbell camera. Email it directly to Tanya, Deshaun called out, pointing to Marcus's sister who had arrived minutes after the arrest. Tanya Johnson, her eyes red but her voice steady, addressed the impromptu gathering of 12 neighbors on Marcus's lawn. "My brother has served this country for 15 years. What they did was illegal, and we're going to prove it." Rita Sandoval, a local paralegal, nodded vigorously. "I've already contacted Jackson Ellis, best civil rights attorney in the state. I recorded everything," said Michael Turner, a college student who lived across the street. "They had the wrong address and kept going anyway. I heard them admit it." Harold Winters, a retired police officer himself, looked grim. "What they did dishonors the badge. I'm willing to testify about proper procedure." Tanya surveyed the growing pile of evidence, video footage, written statements, photos of the damaged door. A community that barely knew each other had suddenly become united in purpose. "They thought he was alone," Tanya said quietly. "They were wrong." Jackson Ellis strode into the police station Monday morning, his tailored suit and confident demeanor drawing all eyes. The front desk officer straightened immediately. "I'm here for Commander Marcus Johnson, illegally detained Friday night," Ellis announced, placing his briefcase on the counter with a decisive thud. "I have a habeas corpus petition ready to file, unless you'd prefer to release him now." Behind him stood Tanya and 3 news crews. Ellis had made one phone call after reviewing the evidence. 20 minutes later, Marcus emerged, still wearing his clothes from Friday night. His face showed fatigue, but his eyes burned with resolve. "Commander Johnson, your thoughts?" asked a reporter, thrusting a microphone forward. Ellis raised a hand. "My client will speak at the press conference this afternoon. For now, know this: what happened to Commander Johnson represents a systemic failure that we intend to expose." In the back of the station, Captain Hayes watched the scene unfold on a monitor, his face ashen. "You've stepped in it now," muttered Police Chief Watkins, appearing beside him. "Ellis doesn't lose cases like this, and the evidence is damning." "It was just a mix-up," Hayes protested weakly. Watkins shook his head. "No, it wasn't. And we both know it." The conference room fell silent as the body camera footage played on the large screen. Officer Ramirez had come forward, risking his career to provide the unedited video that Internal Affairs had mysteriously lost. "Probable cause," Hayes's voice echoed from the speakers. "We received reports of a break-in at this address. Subject matches the description." "What description?" Ramirez asked on screen. "The description I just received. Male. Black. Athletic build." Ellis paused the footage, turning to face the police department's attorneys. Their expressions confirmed what everyone knew: the smoking gun had been found. "There was no report," Ellis stated flatly. "No description. No probable cause." More footage followed, Marcus requesting medical attention 3 times, being denied his phone call, officers laughing about teaching him his place. Tanya squeezed her brother's hand as Marcus watched, his face solemn but vindicated. "That's racial profiling, false imprisonment, excessive force, and civil rights violations," Ellis concluded. "And we have it all on tape." The courtroom buzzed with tension as Captain Hayes took the stand, his confident demeanor cracking under Ellis's methodical questioning. "So to clarify, Captain Hayes," Ellis said, pacing deliberately, "you testified that you had received a report of a break-in matching Commander Johnson's description?" "That's correct," Hayes replied, tugging at his collar. Ellis nodded to the court clerk who handed him a document. "This is the dispatch record from that night. No such call exists." A murmur swept through the courtroom. "Furthermore," Ellis continued, "texts recovered from your phone show you instructing Officer Jenkins to, quote, make sure the commander has an uncomfortable stay." Hayes paled visibly. On the bench, Judge Pearson's expression hardened. "Permission to treat the witness as hostile, Your Honor," Ellis requested. "Granted," Judge Pearson replied, her voice ice-cold. "And Captain Hayes, I suggest you consider very carefully what you say next," as I'm inclined to refer this matter for criminal prosecution." Marcus sat tall beside Tanya, watching justice unfold before his eyes. 6 months later, Marcus stood at a podium outside City Hall, sunlight glinting off his navy uniform as reporters gathered around. "Today marks a new beginning," he announced, his deep voice carrying across the plaza. "The settlement funds will establish the Justice Oversight Committee, ensuring police accountability in our community." Behind him stood Officer Ramirez, now promoted to lieutenant after the department's complete restructuring. Captain Hayes and 3 other officers faced criminal charges, with Hayes already sentenced to 5 years. Mayor Williams approached the microphone. "Commander Johnson could have left our city after what happened. Instead, he chose to stay and help us rebuild." Marcus nodded toward the diverse crowd of supporters, his neighbors, Tanya, Ellis, and dozens of community members wearing "Justice First" badges. "Steel can be forged in fire," Marcus concluded, his words resonating through the square. "And sometimes, injustice becomes the flame that forges lasting change." The crowd erupted in applause as Marcus stepped down, not as a victim, but as a catalyst for transformation.